Well, as I said earlier, when we were talking, we'll have this week and next week, and then we'll break for Thanksgiving and Christmas. But here we are at chapters 18 this week and 19 next time, finishing up our 2024 study, and we still don't have the baby. We still don't have the promised heir. At this point, Abraham is 99 years old. Sarah is 89 years old. It's been 24 years since God called them. I mean, we read that, and because, in these few weeks we've gone from Abraham being 74 to now 99, and we read this in a few weeks, and we don't sometimes stop and think, actually 24 years. Where were you 24 years? What were you doing 24 years ago? Think about that in literal terms, how long that is. But God called them to this land, and finally the time is at hand. Although in chapter 18 there are two separate incidents that take place in this chapter, I actually thought about titling this chapter, God Appears Finally to Sarah, because I think that's a very important part of this chapter. It's an important part of this visit from the Lord and these two angels to actually come to Sarah. So what about you? What stuck in your mind as you read this chapter? Did the questions that I give you anything to jumpstart your study? If you have questions, we probably will try to answer those as we go along, but just things that maybe jumped out at you that you didn't know or surprised you or whatever.
I've always been confused. It says that the Lord appeared to Abraham, but then there's three men.
Yeah.
So who are the three men?
Well, look at chapter 19, verse 1.
So I wonder if they were angels.
They were angels.
Okay.
They were angels.
First I thought, well, they're the Holy Trinity.
Well, that's interesting because the commentaries were all over the place on this chapter. And I'm pretty much, as I study it, there are some things that I think are spiritual to look at. There are things that there are pictures and there are allegories that you can pull from it. But my primary focus is to study it historically because it's real. That's my whole thing about the Bible to start with is it's real. And so, but a lot of the commentaries go off these, way out there in some cases. As one guy listened to, says they're out in woo-woo land. But, that talked about it was a picture of the Trinity coming to him and, a lot of those kinds of things. But historically, and if you read on through, now we're not told in chapter 18 that they're angels. We don't know that specifically until we get to 19. But they are a manifestation of God, which we know is the angel of the Lord, the pre-incarnate Christ, a theophany, and two angels. So that's who the three are. What else?
Almost, when they were talking about Sodom and Gomorrah, and he's like, if there's 50 there, there's 45 there, 30. And I've read that
40.
before, never equated it to the whole purpose of him asking that.
Mm-hmm.
And he gets down to 10 and he stops, and it's like, it's family.
Yeah, that's Lot's family. If you count them all, there are 10 in Lot's family. But also, I noticed, and we'll get this when we get to there. God really doesn't give him an opportunity to go beyond 10, because we might think, well, why didn't he go down to 1? If there's 1, God doesn't give him an opportunity to. As soon as, verse 33, as soon as God had finished speaking, he left. He departed. He didn't give him an opportunity. And of course, God did answer that even less, much less than 10, because he took them out, as we'll see next time. So, but it was the humility on Abraham. I mean, he's not being arrogant about that, and he, you go, as you said, read all the way down through there. he's not trying to force the issue. He's not trying to say, well, how far can I push him? In fact, one of the commentaries said, used the statement, how far will grace go? And I'm like, I don't really like to look at it that way. But he kept asking, and then that was it. But God did protect them.
And why start with 50?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't really know, and nothing ever really addressed that.
I ran across one commentary, and I don't remember which one it was, that said something about 5 cities.
Yeah.
And 10 in each.
That's a really good point, because there are 5 cities, and one of the commentaries I was reading, it did kind of allude to that, because when it got down to the end, it's saying like, are there at least 2 in every city? But that's probably where the 50 came from, because he knew Lot's family was 10, and possibly could there have been 10 in each of the other cities.
Family of their kids' husbands or
Yeah.
spouses or whatever.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah. That's probably what that is. I hadn't really thought about that. Yeah.
Only 3 left with him, wasn't there?
Well, 4 left with him, but his wife turned around and looked, and so it ended up just being 3. It was just Lot. As we'll see next time, Lot, his wife, and the 2 daughters that lived in the house with him.
Was the other ones in the family, say, 7 of them, not counting?
Well, counting the, I'd have to go back to my notes and see. We know it was sons and their wives, and so not just his children, but their spouses.
Sons and wives.
Yeah, he had sons and daughters, other sons and daughters besides the 2 that. Yeah.
Well, you brought it up too about, how long did it take them to prepare all this food and everything, and I thought, I wonder what they talked about this whole time.
Yeah, we're not told. It's just they sit there and looking at one another. Hey, got that calf ready yet? So yeah. I think about things like that. Time wise. In fact, I was going to ask you, how long do you think that took for him to do all of that? So, other thoughts?
I was thinking about that too, like my mother used to kill chickens and, it started on Saturday.
Yeah.
I'm ready for Sunday.
Yeah.
We went out and killed a calf that day and cleaned it and everything.
Cleaned it and butchered it and cooked it and everything. Yeah. All in one day. And apparently in just a few hours. So they must have been very experienced at it. Although this, kind of off subject, this guy shared a video with Joe about cleaning a deer, and so the guy showed all how to do it, and the guy said, honestly, he said, if I wasn't recording this video, I can do this in about 10 minutes. So if it's something you're experienced at doing, and they would have been, but still, just in our minds, you think about, I'd have to be, now where's my knife? Get everything ready. So catch the calf. Yeah, exactly.
It was the calf.
Yeah, it was not a steer or a heifer. It was a calf. So they had veal for supper. So
Well, didn't the bread have to rise?
I don't know. Maybe it was flatbread.
Well, it makes it sound like he's just going to give him a piece of bread and a little water.
Yeah, that's what. Let me have a morsel. Yeah. We'll talk about that. Yeah, that's kind of comical.
And then it's like all this other stuff. Maybe, just stop by and have a piece of bread and a little bit of water and be on your way.
You'd be on your way. Yeah.
And it's like all
But
this.
it's a big deal.
Yeah.
So, okay, if you have other thoughts or questions as we go along, feel free to lift those up. But as I said, there are 2 separate things taking place in this chapter. 2 objectives for God's visit. One is for Sarah and one is for Abraham. But as we imagine, remember that Moses is compiling this story. Moses is putting all this together. And as we imagine Moses compiling this history, he continues, there's no chapter and verse breaks. He continues from chapter 17, verse 27, when it talked about all the men of the household who were born in the house or bought with money from a foreigner were circumcised with him. Now the Lord appeared to him. Speaking of Abraham. So we see that leading into, from chapter 17, leading into chapter 18, the Lord appeared to him, appeared to Abraham. Now this is the fourth time that God has appeared to Abraham, but this time is in an entirely different way. I never really thought about that until I was studying this. God appeared first to him. Well, we don't know what happened at his initial call, but the first record we have of God appearing to him is in chapter 12, verse 7, right after Abram and his whole assortment of family, servants, animals, and everything, all as they arrive in Canaan, right before Abram decides to go to Egypt. When he comes back from Egypt, God spoke to him when Lot separated from him, but God did not appear again until chapter 15, verse 1, after that war of chapter 14. It says that the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision. And the first thing God said was, do not fear, Abram. And like I said, after we studied that chapter, thanks to Gail Bowers of the Tuesday night group, I've changed my mind on why I think Abraham was afraid. And I don't think it had anything really to do with the events of chapter 14, which is what all the commentaries tell you. He was afraid of retaliation. He was, all these different things. But I think, as Gail mentioned, that it was the word of the Lord appearing in a vision that caused him to fall down. That caused, let's see, how to put it, that caused him to be afraid. Do not fear, Abram. Because that happens so many times in scriptures when the Lord appears, or even when an angel appears, like with Mary, the first thing that they have to say to them is, don't be afraid.
But why would he tell them not to be afraid that time? I mean, that's not the first time that he had appeared to Abram.
But it's the first time he appeared to him in a vision. It's the first time the word of the Lord appeared in a vision. We don't know what was different about that.
Okay.
But I think however he appeared to him was so different than what he'd seen before, that he was afraid. But in that appearance, God assured Abram that the heir, the son of promise, would come from Abram's own body. And we know that Abram believed God because we read that it was reckoned to him, or it was credited to him, as righteousness. But after that, God did not appear to Abram for a very long time, at least 14 or 15 years. Why? Because Abram and Sarah had taken matters into their own hands and decided that God expected them to do something. And Sarah gave her personal maid to Abram to have a child with. Now, there's a lot of different views on that chapter. We talked about that when we did that chapter. My opinion is I don't see it as a scheme. I don't see it as a devious plan, which is what a lot of the commentaries said. And actually, the more I learn about Abraham as we go along, and I see, like in this chapter, I see his humility, the more I believe that even though it was an acceptable practice, even though it was the law of the land, I don't believe that it ever crossed Abram's mind to do that. I mean, he could have compelled, as the patriarch, he could have compelled Sarah to do that, to supply a surrogate to have a child with, but he never did that. And my opinion, and this is strictly my opinion, is that I believe he loved Sarah so much that never crossed his mind until Sarah suggested it. And that with that he went along. Now you might view his willingness differently, and we can have different opinions on that, but that's the way that learning what I am learning about Abraham, that's how I see this man. But because of doing that, regardless of which way you feel on that, because of that, God did not appear to Abram again until Ishmael was 13 years old. As we said last time, perhaps Abram and Sarah had just resigned themselves to the fact that well, we've blown it, that Ishmael's going to be our only son. He's going to be the son of promise, and that's just it. You hadn't heard a word from God in these 14, 15 years, however long it had been. And then we come to chapter 17, verse 1, that says, now when Abram was 99 years old, the Lord appeared to Abram and said to him, I am God Almighty. Walk before me and be blameless. And what did Abram do? He fell on his face. We don't know if it was out of worship, if it was out of fear, or perhaps even out of relief that God had not left him. I mean, 15 years with no word from God, not a word. He had to have wondered if God had just left him. So perhaps out of relief, he fell down before the Lord, maybe a little bit of all three. But God's first three appearances were, if you look at them in order, each one was a little bit more spectacular than the one before it. And so it's easy to see how he didn't recognize God. Here, he didn't recognize that this was the Lord. And you'll notice that it's the Lord is in all caps. So this is the covenant Lord that appeared to him, but he didn't recognize him. And this, we might say, this mundane appearance. So Moses sets the stage for us. Now the Lord appeared to him by the oaks of Mamre while Abraham was sitting at the tent door in the heat of the day. So we don't know where the events of the first part of chapter 17 took place, but at least the last part of chapter 17 took place there at the home where all the servants were, where the men were circumcised. So as chapter 18 begins, we know that he's at home. He's at his tent in Mamre, which we know on our maps as Hebron. And we know that it's during the hottest part of the day. We don't know how long this has been since the events of chapter 17. We know that it couldn't have been very long because Abraham and Sarah are still both 99. The child hasn't been conceived yet. And some commentators suggested that it was just within a few days of the events of chapter 17. Perhaps Abraham was sitting around, healing from the circumcision. Others don't mention that at all and just point out that it was in the heat of the day, which is when most would stop their work. They didn't have air conditioning. You would get up early and work until the heat of the day. You'd take a rest and then work into the evening. But about sitting there, the way these tents were in this desert area, the way these tents were made, they were designed to allow air to flow through in the heat and to close the flaps and hold in heat when it was cold. So with the tent flaps open, and he's sitting where the breeze can pass through in the heat of the day. Some of the commentaries said that were very pious and said that he was praying and meditating. I always thought he was taking a nap. Like if you sit down in the middle of the day, Joe says our recliner has a switch in it. You sit down, it makes your eyes close. So,
He's 99 years old.
He's 99 years old. He sits down. He goes to sleep, I'm not near 99, but if I sat down, that would happen.
That's certainly true for 85.
But even if he was praying and meditating, which he may have been before he fell asleep, perhaps he was praying about how he's supposed to tell Sarah what God had told him. I've said last time that I was really perplexed about why did this happen again so soon? I've come to think that probably in chapter 17, when God said to Abraham, verse 15, after Sarah your wife, you shall not call her name Sarah, but Sarah, and I will bless her indeed. I will give you a son by her. She wasn't there. I don't think he'd told her yet. but particularly because of the way she reacts when she hears it. So maybe he's praying and he's meditating now. What's the best way for me to approach this subject? How am I supposed to tell her what God said? That specifically, that nations and kings will come from her. Is she going to throw something at me? Is she going to laugh at me? How am I going to do this? So, as I said, I think he hadn't told her yet. But there's where we are as the account begins. Now, one of the things that I mentioned in your lesson was to notice the amount of details in this chapter. Details tell us that this is a real historical account. We know where it took place. He's sitting at the tent in the shade of the trees. We know what time of day it occurred, in the heat of the day. And I'll share a little bit more about details as we go along. So whether Abraham was napping or praying, he looks up, he hears something, and he looks up, and verse 2 says, and when he lifted up his eyes and looked, behold, 3 men were standing opposite. Now, we don't know how close they were to him. Maybe they were coming down the road, because he does run to them. When he saw them, he ran from the tent door to meet them and bowed himself to the earth. So he has to at least go a distance. They're not just like in his face when he looks up. And verse 3 says, he says, my Lord. Now, in my translation, that's all lowercase letters, indicating that he doesn't recognize him as the Lord, the covenant Yahweh, but he's calling him sir. That's the same word for sir as it is for Lord, depending on the context and how it's used. And then he says, if now I have found favor in your sight, please do not pass your servant by. As I said, we don't know differences of opinion. There are those that say he knew exactly who it was immediately, that he recognized the Lord. Others say that this was just his character. He was being hospitable. And I think it was his character. As we'll read more in this chapter, and then if you read more about Abraham, you see that he was hospitable.
It was more that there was an urgency about it.
There was an urgency about it.
I think he knew there was something different. Because of the circumstances that came and coming during the heat of the day.
Yeah, traveling during the heat of the day.
And I think he maybe had some kind of spiritual intuition that because he did, there was an urgency.
It's like, please. Please.
Yeah, exactly.
Please do not pass by your servant.
Exactly. That's what he said.
It's a little bit beyond just hospitality.
Hey, why don't you stop off here? Yeah, there was something, maybe it was how they were dressed, maybe there was just something about them that gave him an urgency. You're right, for them to stop by.
They glow.
Yeah, they glowed. They couldn't keep
We're not told that.
Couldn't keep their wings hidden under their coat or something, but actually, even if we don't know the story, and even if we don't know who these men are, we do find out as we go along. As we said earlier, by verse 1 of chapter 19 tells us point blank that 2 of them are angels. And I think it's this particular incident that Hebrews 13:2 is alluding to when it says, do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for by this some have entertained angels unaware. This was the specific incident that is pointing to. But whether Abraham knew or not, look at what he did. He ran from the tent door to meet them and he bowed down. Now this word for bowed down is a word that is normally used for worship, but not always, not exclusively used for worship. It is used for worship, but not exclusively. It can mean just to be welcoming. But as Linda said, and that's what I've got here, perhaps there was something about these men that commanded respect. He knew that they were some sort of authoritative figures. Or, as we're getting to know Abraham a little bit more, as just the kind of man that he is. That's the kind of thing he would do. If you read in the book of James, it talks very specifically about not showing partiality, about not taking the rich up and telling the poor, you just sit anywhere you can find a place. perhaps that was just the kind of man that he was. But then he said, verses 4 and 5, please, and this is what Sandy was talking about earlier, please let a little water be brought and wash your feet and rest yourselves under the tree, and I will bring you a piece of bread that you may refresh yourselves, and after that you may go on, since you have visited your servant. And they said, so do as you have said. In other words, sounds good to me. I love it. The King James Version says, I will bring you a morsel of bread. It sounds like, I'll break you off a little piece and bring to you. But then look at verse 6. So Abraham hurried into the tent to Sarah and said, quickly, prepare 3 measures of fine flour, knead it, and make bread cakes. So 3 measures of fine flour, not just any old flour, but fine flour, white lily. Get out your best. And 3 measures, according to my Bible, 3 measures is 1 seah, S-E-A-H, and that is equal to about 11 quarts of flour. Other commentaries say it was equal to 20 quarts of flour.
Mine says 15.
That's anywhere from 44 to 80 cups.
I know. When I
flour.
saw that, I went, they're making a heck of a lot of bread.
I thought that'd make a mighty big biscuit.
Yeah.
My angel biscuit recipe calls for 5 cups of flour, and it'll make 30 biscuits. So 44 cups of flour, that's a lot of bread. But notice, again, the King James Version says, I will bring you a morsel of bread. It's like your grandmother saying, oh, here, have just a little piece of pie, have a bite of pie, and it just heaping it up on your plate. So Abraham tells Sarah, he sets her to baking the bread. And then verse 7, he ran to the herd, he took a tender and choice calf, picked one of the best ones, gave it to the servant, and he hurried to prepare it. As we said, how long do you think that took?
Quickly.
Yeah, they did it quickly. They were very experienced at doing it, but still it's not something that you're going to do in 30 minutes.
Cooking's cooking.
Cooking is cooking regardless of how long they take to get it ready.
Prepared the whole animal or just a...
I don't, it doesn't say. Maybe they just cut out a brisket and fix that, but then they got to finish up the rest of it. But whatever it was, even just if you cut out a little bit, like Linda said, cooking's cooking.
Well, the bread had to rise, I guess.
Well, unless it was a flatbread, but whatever.
Even to bake it.
Had to bake it. That's exactly right. So then afterward, it said, and he, Abraham, took curds and milk and the calf which he had prepared and placed it before them, and he was standing by them under the tree as they ate. Now, verse 8 is very important. We can read over it quickly and not catch the importance of it. First, 2 things. First of all, Abraham was standing by them under the tree as they ate. He was prepared to serve them. He didn't sit down and eat with them.
Yeah, that's what I thought too.
He stayed at the ready if they needed more water or more, okay, they need more bread, but, yeah, just like your server would, standing by ready. But there's something else very important about this verse, and that is that they ate.
Yeah. If they were angels, that meant that they were eating angels.
That's right. They were eating. As I said, we have a tendency to read over it to get to Sarah's eavesdropping. But look at that again. He took it and set it before them as he was standing by them under the tree as they ate. They ate this. Some commentaries said, they didn't really eat it. It just appeared that they were eating because angels can't eat, But it says, and they ate. We've said all along in this study, beginning with chapter 1, that things could have happened any number of ways. But what did God say happened? God said they ate.
Does that mean he ate too?
Yes.
God.
Yes.
Did God eat too?
Yes. As a man. Jesus in his glorified body ate. In his resurrected body ate with the disciples. That tells us that there's going to be food in the eternal state. I'm excited about that.
We're going to have the feast.
I can eat whatever I want. That's what I said. I'm really excited about that.
The wedding feast of the Lamb.
That's right. There's going to be food.
With lots of bread.
Yeah, lots of bread.
And no calories.
But this is important, though, because it helps us to understand chapter 6, where we believe that fallen angels procreated with earthly women. What you believe in one place, you have to believe in the other place. You have to be consistent in what you believe. If you don't believe chapter 6 happened, then you won't believe that they really ate, and vice versa. But the angels took on human form, and they also took on human function. And then verse 9 says, and they said to him, now this is not just the Lord speaking here. Perhaps it wasn't like they said in unison, where's Sarah? No, they in speaking, but they also, where's Sarah? Where's Sarah, your wife? And Abraham said, behold, in the tent. So, but what was interesting to me, when they said to him, where is Sarah, your wife? Do you think that surprised him? That they would know about Sarah. They would know her name, know his wife's name.
Never thought about that.
Well, I was thinking that they knew where she was. I mean,
they probably did. God did. God did in omniscience, but they are speaking to Abraham and said, where is Sarah, your wife? He doesn't know who they are. He doesn't know it's God and angels. Is he surprised that they know his wife? One of the commentaries said he would not be surprised because he and Sarah were very well known in the region. They'd lived there for a long time and very well known. And I thought, yeah, but they may have been well known as Abram and Sarai, but Abraham and Sarah just got their new names. Nobody else would know that. I mean, it wouldn't have had time to spread throughout the countryside. Yeah. So that, as I said, that just happened. So then Abraham replied. He said, behold, in the tent. She's in the tent. And in verse 10, and he, this would be the Lord, said, I will surely return to you now this is really important. I will return to you at this time next year, and behold, Sarah your wife shall have a son. And Sarah was listening at the tent door, which was behind him. The Lord is sitting with his back to the tent door. He's not looking toward, it's not like he could see her in the shadows in there somewhere. She's with her, he's sitting with it to the back. Okay, and then and Moses then reminds us, who are hearing this story or reading this, Moses reminds us, you can put this in parentheses, now Abraham and Sarah were old, advanced in age. Sarah was past childbearing. Even though Sarah has been barren since she was a young woman, she could have had a child when she was 20. But that's not exactly what it's talking about here. She is beyond childbearing years, beyond the physical capability of having a child. There's some things you just can't do anymore. And that's where Sarah was at verse 12. And Sarah laughed to herself, saying, after I have become old, shall I have pleasure, my Lord being old also. I was thinking about this last night and thinking about not only had she been barren all these years, that wasn't really the issue now. Now she's beyond the capability Even if she had not been barren before, she's beyond the capability. And I got to thinking about myself, and I thought, I used to play ball, baseball, basketball. We didn't have middle school; it was 1 through 8. Even when we would choose up teams sides to play ball at recess, I'd get picked before some of the other boys would get picked. So I could play ball, and I remembered that when I was in high school, there was. How your elementary and middle school, they have field day and stuff. Well, when I was in high school, there was some sort of a Knox County Schools field day where all the high schools had a field. I don't know if they still do that or not, probably not. But I remember we rode the boat, it was at Tom Black Track. And I was on the team, and I was representing Carter in the running long jump. If you know what the running long jump is. If I remember correctly, I came in third in all of Knox County. But today, if you told me that I needed to be in a running long jump, I'd say, hey, no way. I'd be exactly where Sarah is. That ain't happening. And laugh at it because I can't run and I can't jump. So, but it was, in Sarah's case, it was a laugh of doubt, but it was more of an incredulous, that ain't happening kind of thing.
Absurd. It was just absurd.
Absurd, exactly. It was more physical unbelief than, it's like me saying, I can't run and I can't jump. But she was caught. She was caught. Verse 14 says, is anything too difficult for the Lord? And that's a principle that many people quote without knowing the context of it. And I gave you a few examples in your lesson of scriptures for that, but it's all over the Bible. I mean, you can, maybe not exactly in those words, but that concept is all over the Bible. The word difficult there, is anything too difficult for the Lord, is also a word that can also mean wonderful. Is anything too wonderful for the Lord? The way that this word or phrase is used, and I won't say the way it's always used because I didn't research it that well, but the way that this word is often used is used just preceding or describing what wonderful thing God has just said He is going to do. That phrase, is anything too difficult, is anything too hard, always describes something that He's about to do. As for instance, when Gabriel had just told Mary about the child that she was going to have, as well as the fact that Elizabeth, her cousin Elizabeth, was expecting. Same words, is anything impossible for God? Is anything too wonderful? Because He just described these wonderful things. So here in verse 14, God continues with the rest of verse 14, and He says, at the appointed time, I will return to you. At this time next year, Sarah shall have a son. Now, there's some thought about when He says the appointed time, that's the same phrase that's used for some of the feasts. Now, is it possible that it would have been the springtime when He's talking about the Passover time, or would it be at the fall feast? We don't know. There's some indication in some of the Jewish commentaries that it may have been, but we don't know that. But at any rate, at this time next year, Sarah indeed will. Oh, wait a minute! I missed verse 13. So the Lord said to Abraham, "Why did Sarah laugh, saying, shall I indeed bear a child when I am so old? Is anything too difficult for the Lord?" So then He goes on and says, at this time next year, she will have a son. So sometime within the next 3 months, she's going to conceive, because a year from that, she would have the child. The first part of Hebrews 11:11 puts it this way. It says, by faith, even Sarah herself received ability to conceive, even beyond the proper time of life. I actually like the King James Version better here. The King James Version says, through faith also, Sarah herself received strength to conceive seed and was delivered of a child when she was past age. She received strength to conceive. If God says you can run and jump, you can run and jump. But the man that was speaking, and now it becomes obvious that it's the Lord, the man's authoritative and omniscient word about Sarah scared her. I didn't laugh. Well, she didn't laugh out loud, but she laughed in herself. How'd he know what she thought? Surely this must be the Lord. Verse 15 is worded a little differently in different translations, but I love how the New American Standard reads it. Verse 15 says, Sarah denied it, however, saying, I did not laugh, for she was afraid. But he said, no, but you did laugh. Alfred Edersheim said that Sarah's laughter was reproved, but then removed. And the rest of Hebrews 11:11 adds that she received strength to conceive because she considered him faithful who had promised such.
That's just such a human thing to do.
Yeah.
I mean, she's like she was busted, you know?
Yeah.
It's like she laughed and she shouldn't have laughed.
Yeah.
But to laugh, you know, it's...
it was like you said, it was incredulous. I mean, it's absurd.
Yeah.
I can't do that. So that...
Maybe she didn't recognize that was the Lord speaking to her.
Well, she didn't until he said
Yes.
that.
And then she's like, "Why does he just say that?"
And then it's like,
And then,
you can,
I didn't laugh.
no, but you did laugh. But what's interesting about that is that's the end of it. That's the end of that part of the story. So, any comments, other comments, or thoughts on that part of it?
what did you just say? Something that she approved. What? It wasn't more than what you said.
It said she received strength to conceive. This is Hebrews 11:11. She received strength to conceive because she considered him faithful who had promised such.
Was it Edersheim that she was from?
Oh, yeah, about,
Edersheim.
He said that Sarah's laughter was reproved, then removed.
Okay, I like that.
Yeah, I loved that. I thought he got her. Oh, you laughed, but the reproof was taken away, and she was given the child. So so now we come to verse 16. And it's getting later on in the evening after they've done all that cooking and they've done all that eating. But it's after the hot part of the day had passed and it's time for the men to go on. Then the men rose up from there, looked down toward Sodom, and Abraham was walking with them to send them off. I mean, you know how it is. We had a friend at the house today that was helping Joe lay some block, and as he was leaving, you walk out with him, you walk out to the vehicle, and you talk and you stand around until they plumb pull out of the driveway. I mean, you're learning that down here, aren't you? And that's if you're of our generation. Now, my kids go back in the house and close the door, and we're left to leave best we can. So, yeah. Hey, you're gone. See ya. Exactly. So,
minutes later, you still haven't said goodbye.
That for us.
People didn't drive everywhere before cars.
Yeah.
That you walked everywhere, and I remember my grandparents. Like one of them would when my sister and I go, they'd walk a ways with us. I guess that was just They didn't just.
And everybody wasn't
They'd
as
walk a little
hungry.
ways down the road with us. And go back.
Yeah, that's what we do. That's what we did. So, but it's interesting. It's interesting that phrase. I'm in a place. The men rose up from there and looked down towards Sodom. In verse 1, we saw that Abraham looked up and saw the men. And here the men looked down toward Sodom. And this is true geographically. It is, Abraham was sitting down and he looks up, whether he's asleep or not. He looks up and sees the men coming. And geographically, where they are, up on the plain and looking down into Sodom. But this is one of those things that is also true spiritually. It's like in John 13, verse 30, at the Last Supper. Judas has taken, Jesus has washed the feet of all the disciples, including Judas. Jesus has taken the bread and broken it and given it to all the disciples, including Judas. And then Jesus has said to Judas, if you remember, he says, what you do quickly. What you must do quickly. And Judas got up and left. But John 13:30, John says, when that happened, John says, and it was night. And it is. That's true physically. It was nighttime as this was happening, but it was also night in Judas's heart. So they looked down towards Sodom. And Sodom is at a very, very low place, geographically as well as spiritually. But Abraham is walking along with them. And the commentaries disagree in these next few verses whether God is speaking out loud, sort of musing to himself, where Abraham can overhear what he's saying, or whether we are simply allowed to know his thoughts before he speaks to Abraham. My opinion on that is, you can take it either way, but my opinion is that Abraham doesn't hear these first words. He doesn't hear the words from verses 17 through 19. So the Lord said, and I believe the Lord is speaking to himself. He's thinking this, and Moses is allowed to know this and to record this for us. And the Lord said, shall I hide from Abraham what I'm about to do? Because if Abraham's hearing that, he's going to say, hide? What? I don't think he hears this at all. Shall I hide from Abraham what I'm about to do? Since Abraham will surely become a great and mighty nation, and in him all the nations of the earth shall be blessed. And then in verse 19, God, or Moses, if he's recording this, lets us in on why God chose Abraham. If you want to go back to chapter 12 in Abraham's first call, and you want to know why God chose him, this is why God chose him. So verse 19, I'm going to break this down a little bit. So God says, for I have chosen him. Now your translation may say no. I have known him, or I know him. The word chosen there means to know. It means closely. It means intimately. In James 2:23, Abraham is known as a friend of God. In Isaiah 41 verse 8, God calls him Abraham, my friend. They are close. God knows him well. I have chosen him so that, or in order that, he may command his children and his household after him. Command them? Command them to do what? To keep the way of the Lord. That word keep there is the word shamar. Now we're familiar with the word shema. But this is the word shamar, and this word means to protect. It can mean to safeguard. It can mean to put a hedge of protection around something. I've chosen him so that he may teach his children and his household after him to protect, to keep the way of the Lord by doing righteousness and justice. Well, first of all, to keep the way of the Lord. The way of the Lord, all caps, Yahweh, which we know is the covenant of God. So what is the way of the Lord? The way of the Lord, he says, is by doing righteousness and justice. We talked in last week's lesson, and we used this in many different lessons. We talked about how important our walk is. Our way. Keep the way of the Lord. The first Christians, believers, weren't called Christians until much later. They were called followers of the way because they followed the way of Christ. So Abraham is saying, or God is saying, I chose Abraham to teach his family to safeguard the way, their walk, how they live. And what is that? By doing righteousness and justice. And we'll see in a moment that we'll see that Abraham knows exactly what righteousness and justice is. But why should Abraham teach his family that? In order that, or so that the Lord may bring upon Abraham what he has spoken about him. All the things that God said about him. I will make you a great nation. I will, kings will come from you. Many nations will come from you. Keep the way of the Lord. Walk the way of the Lord. What is that? Righteousness and justice. Teach your family that so that I can bring this upon you. It almost seems like circular logic. One of my favorite verses in the Bible, I'm going to take a lot of time with this, but in Exodus, you'll have to look it up, in Exodus 33, verse 13, Moses is crying out to the Lord, and he says, to paraphrase, if I have found favor in your sight, show me your way so that I might find favor in your sight. I love that. It's like a spiral. If I found favor in your sight, show me your way so that I can find favor in your sight. Yeah, the more you do it, the more God shows you, the more favor you have, the more you delight. And that's what this is. Teach your family so that I know you, I love you, I called you to do this. Teach your family so that I can do this. I just love that concept. Teach your family so that I can do all the things, the Lord can do all the things that He has spoken about Him. And so God decides to tell him in verses 20 and 21. And the Lord said, you can imagine, just picture this, they're walking along. I think God is thinking this in his mind, so he's not saying anything out loud. And nothing is being said maybe among them. And then all of a sudden, God says, the outcry of Sodom and Gomorrah is indeed great, and their sin is exceedingly grave. I will go down now and see if they have done entirely according to its outcry, which has come to me, and if not, I will know. So, first of all, did God really need to go see? Of course not. So why do you think He put it that way? Why did He say, I'm going to go see? Any thoughts on that?
It defines his character.
Yeah, defines his character. You and I, we know that God didn't need to go see. We know God is omniscient. God knows everything. He did not need to go see. But I think, you remember in chapter 11, the Tower of Babel, God came down to see what was happening there, what was going on, and then He said, let us go down and confuse their languages. Did God have to go there to do that? No, He could have done it from where He was at. I believe that God uses these terms, and they're called anthropomorphic. One of those cool words that I love that word. Anthropomorphic. But anthropomorphic means giving human attributes to something that is not human.
Anthropomorphism.
Yeah, God sees. Well, God doesn't have eyes. God's hand was upon me. God doesn't have a literal hand to put upon you. But what they're doing is ascribing to God human terms. That helps us understand God a little better. And actually, God is condescending to man by saying that, lest anyone would say, oh yeah, well how's he know? Has he been there? As I said, you and I know He doesn't need to go there. But someone else not knowing God might ask that. And so God says, I'm going to go down and see.
I thought it was like He was drawing their attention down there. Like if you were to say to someone, I wonder if my purse is on the counter over there. Mm-hmm. I mean, your attention would be drawn to the purse to see if the purse is on the counter.
mhm.
You know, I think he was drawing Abraham's attention to that situation.
Could be. He says, I'm going to go and see if they've done
Yeah,
what I've been told that they've done.
yeah.
So he said, and if not, then I will know. So
Do you think he was giving them another chance? Almost.
no, I don't think so.
Okay.
I think that's just he's
I mean,
telling.
he already knew.
Yeah, but he's telling Abraham
Yeah.
what he's about to do. And but why?
From Abraham, the question that his saying what he was going to do may have elicited Abraham's question.
Oh, absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely it does, because he's just said to himself, "Should I tell him? Should I not tell him?"
Yeah.
And so he tells him because he wants Abraham to know, because Abraham is a part of what's going on there. But why these two cities specifically? We know from chapter 13 that this whole area where these cities are is called the Circle of the Jordan, and there are 5 cities there, as we said earlier, 5 cities. And we will see in chapter 19 that 4 of the cities do end up being destroyed. But why does God mention these 2 specifically? Well, first of all, these 2 specifically, and Sodom more so specifically, had seen the power of the Lord through Abram's rescue. Remember that whole chapter 14. They had, many of the people, we don't know how many had been captured and taken off along with Lot, but we know that there were many of them. So they had seen the hand of the Lord in directing Abram in the rescue. Plus, they had been delivered and they had heard the testimony of Melchizedek blessing Abram when he came back. Lot had been living there, and hopefully he'd been at least somewhat of a witness. As we read in Romans chapter 1, they would be judged on the amount of light which they had been given. And God told Abraham, verse 20 again, the outcry of Sodom and Gomorrah is indeed great, and their sin is exceedingly grave. Now think about this. The outcry of Sodom and Gomorrah. Who's crying out? When we get to chapter 19, it doesn't look like anybody's upset about what's going on. They're all a part of what's going on. So who is crying out? Lot doesn't seem to be too concerned about what's going on either.
Perhaps it's the angels.
Well, I'm sure there were a few people that were upset or knew that what was going on was wrong. So were they the ones that were crying out and asking for help? Or?
That's what I think. As I was reading this, it hit me. If the outcry was coming up, where was the outcry coming from?
Mm-hmm. So
And
maybe a few righteous people.
Well, I don't know if it's so much the righteous people, but we know what was going on in Sodom and Gomorrah, and so we know there were victims.
True.
The victims were crying out to
Almost
God.
like in Revelation, the martyrs under the
The martyrs cry out, "How long, O Lord?" In Exodus, God tells Moses, "I have heard their cry." You go back to, I thought I wrote it down. Anyway, you go back to chapter 4, and Abel's blood cries out from the ground. Innocent blood cries out from the ground. Today, make no mistake, innocent blood is crying out to God, and God is hearing it. It has God's ear as well.
Does Moses know how bad it is in Sodom?
Abraham or Moses?
I'm sorry.
Abraham. I think he does.
Okay.
Well, the innocent blood would be from those babies that had already passed. They're already gone. They're in heaven. And so what I was thinking, I had an entirely different take on it. I thought the outcry was from the entire unseen world, the whole angelic host who sees what man is doing.
Could be.
And is so aghast at how the sin and how bad it is.
Could be. I just, was thinking if the city was crying out, then it would be somebody in the city. But that could be. So then verse 22 tells us, then the men, this is the two that's walking along with Abraham and the Lord, the men turned away from there and went toward Sodom while Abraham was still standing before the Lord. And then verse 23 tells us, and Abraham came near and said. I just picture this. God has said to Abraham, the outcry of Sodom and Gomorrah is indeed great, and their sin is exceedingly grave. I will go down now and see if they've done entirely according to the outcry which has come to me, and if not, I will know. Then the men turned away from there and went toward Sodom, with Abraham still standing before the Lord, and Abraham came near, and said. Now, we don't know how close Abraham was standing to the Lord when all this was taking place. But however close it was, he took a step closer, maybe reaching out a hand, maybe going, and remembering Lot and his family. You know that when God said Sodom and Gomorrah, Abraham immediately thought about Lot. Maybe Abraham had gotten to know some of those people that he rescued. I mean, we saw on the map how far they had to travel to come back from where he rescued them, way north of Damascus. You had to have gotten to know people as you travel with them. When you are invested in others, you tend to care more about them. I mean, make no mistake, Abraham knew what went on in Sodom. I mean, he knew what the king of Sodom had said to him in chapter 14, that the king wanted souls and not the spoils. But Abraham still cared for the people. I mean, we all have friends who are living sinful lifestyles. You may even have friends who are totally pagan, living in total unbelief, but we still love them. And our hearts break for them. I just imagine that's what Abraham is feeling. And so Abraham said, wilt thou indeed sweep away the righteous with the wicked? Just suppose there are 50 righteous within the city. Will you indeed sweep it away and not forgive the place for the sake of 50 righteous who are in it? At this point, most all the commentaries begin talking about, it kind of hit me funny, they all begin talking about Abraham's intercessory prayer, and honestly, intercessory prayer had not entered my mind. I mean, I began reading all these commentaries, and they're all talking about Abraham's intercessory prayer, and I'm like, whoa, that is an intercessory prayer, isn't it? I asked you in your lesson about other times that someone had interceded for someone else, but the term intercessory prayer didn't come to mind in the way that we normally think of it. But Abraham is talking to God for the needs of others. That's exactly what intercessory prayer is, whether you're talking in person or you're on your knees like we would be. But this,
I kind of looked at it as negotiation.
I don't think so.
I mean, it's like 50, and then he goes to 45.
But you got it. But if you look at Abraham's demeanor,
well, right. But he said, if I can just, and I think about that, our country. You know, people say that God's going to judge America and all that, and I'm just thinking, look at all the righteous people in America for the sake of the righteous people.
What did God do in chapter 19 for the righteous people?
In chapter
19.
Oh.
He took them out,
yeah.
And then he destroyed the city.
Yeah.
So what's going to happen in America? He's going to take them out and then destroy.
I'm ready.
I'm ready too. Maybe today, Lord, maybe today. But Abraham, as I said, Abraham is talking to God for the needs of others. And this is the first time we find someone in Scripture praying or asking God about someone else. Now, just to give you a heads up, when we come back in January, chapter 20, we'll have another account where Abraham prays for someone else. But This is the first account of intercessory prayer. But before we get to what Abraham asked, we need to look first at what he declared. Look again in verse 24, leading into 25. Suppose there, and you read this, and if you know the history, and you know the time that Abraham has spent with these people that he saved, that he rescued, and Lot's family, and maybe he's trying to add up in his mind how many there were of them altogether, or maybe there were, as we said earlier, 2 from every city, or 10 from every city. But at any rate, he says, verse 24. Suppose there are 50 righteous within the city. Would you indeed sweep it away and not forgive the place, the city, for the sake of the 50 righteous who are in it? And then he goes on in verse 25 and says, far be it from thee to do such a thing, to slay the righteous with the wicked, so that the righteous and the wicked are treated alike. Far be it from this is not like you. This is not in your character to do this. Shall not the judge of all the earth deal justly, or do what is right? The word deal justly there is a judicial term. It's like rendering a verdict. What he is saying is, will not the judge of all the earth render the right verdict in this court case? And we know from this that Abraham knew God quite well. I said a moment ago that God is thinking about Abraham, that he'll teach his household to keep the way of the Lord. What is the way of the Lord? It's doing righteousness and justice. And we see right here that Abraham knows what the way of the Lord is, because he just says to him, that's not like you to do this. Doing righteousness and justice, and that's essentially what Abraham said back to him. That to do such a thing, that would be far from you to do such a thing, to slay the righteous with the wicked. For you are just, you are loving, and you are just. But Abraham knows, here's the thing, Abraham knows what God's about to do. He might not know how, but he knows what, for sure. And I don't think that Abraham thought that God might deal unjustly, but I think that Abraham maybe just first realized the fact behind widespread destruction. Kill them all means kill them all. Just think about that. And it's just like, going to destroy everybody?
Did he know about Noah? He obviously had to know about
Noah? Absolutely.
Yeah, so he's thinking,
Well, that's killed them all, didn't it?
Yeah, that definitely. But there's a difference in saying kill them all if you don't know anybody that lives there, and say kill them all and you know somebody that lives there. Big difference. One commentary said it is extremely difficult, if not impossible, to pray effectively for lost souls if one is not convinced that lostness will ultimately result in literal, eternal punishment. Eternity is eternity, whether you're talking about heaven or hell. You can't pray effectively for lost souls if you don't believe that's real. So we could break this down as we go on through. I thought we run closer on time with this, so I didn't take a whole lot of time with this last part. But we could break this down. But you know what happens here. Abraham's prayer, his request of God, is highly reverent. He is never presumptuous. He is never demanding. Yes, we are to come boldly to the throne of God, but if we read the rest of that verse, Hebrews 4:16 says that when we do, we receive mercy and we find grace. Abraham didn't storm heaven, but he was persistent. So look at the rest of the chapter. So the Lord said, if I find in Sodom 50 righteous within the city, then, and notice the number of times, we've talked before about how many times God says, I will do something. And here we see God says, I will not. The Lord said, if I find 50 righteous within the city, then I will not destroy. I will spare the whole place on their account. And Abraham answered and said, now behold, I have ventured to speak. I have undertaken to speak to the Lord, although I am but dust and ashes. He understands that he has no right to ask God this. And he says, suppose the 50 righteous are lacking 5. Will you destroy the whole city because of 5? And God said, I will not destroy it if I find 45 there. And he spoke to God again and said, suppose 40 are found there. And God said, I will not do it on account of the 40. And then he said, oh Lord, don't be angry. I've got to ask, and I shall speak. Suppose there are 30 found there. And God said, I will not do it if I find 30 there. And he said, now, I venture to speak, Lord, suppose 20 are found there. And God said, I will not destroy it on account of the 20. And then you can imagine him pleading, because he knows now he's down to Lot's family. And he said, oh, may the Lord not be angry. And I shall speak only this once. This is it. This is as far as I'm going. Suppose 10 are found there. And the Lord said, I will not destroy it on account of the 10. And as soon as the Lord had finished speaking to Abraham, the Lord departed, and Abraham returned to his place. Abraham went back to the oaks of Mamre. Imagine that walk back by himself. Imagine, just because he really knows there's not even 10. And he's just dealing with that. And I was really, as I was studying this, I was really taken by intercessory prayer. Back in the summer, before we started these lessons, I was reading this book, Andrew Murray, on prayer. And actually, this is a compilation of these different books. His books are real small, and this is all of them in one collection. But the ministry of intercession. And I really learned some really interesting things about intercessory prayer in that. And I want to take just a little time just to touch on that. Any other thoughts on Abraham before I talk about this intercessory prayer? Well, what I found was, what surprised me was that there are many different types of intercessory prayer. You just think of intercessory prayer as you're just praying for somebody else. But there are many different types of intercessory prayer. In this particular one, this very first example we're given in Scripture, Abraham is praying for Sodom and Gomorrah. This is essentially praying for the lost, if not by name, at least by number. You know, we can pray, oh Lord, save all the lost people. Yeah. But when we say, save this person and save this person, then it becomes personal. In chapter 20, there will be another one. I'm not going to go into that. You know, there's all kinds through the Bible. In Exodus 17, we have Aaron and Hur. You remember, they hold Moses' arms up. That type of intercessory prayer is when someone has a job or a task to do. We can't do it for them, but we can come alongside them and pray for them as they're doing it. The one that really we hear this one all the time, the 4 men who carried their friend on the bed to see Jesus. And because Jesus tells them, when they let him down through the roof, Jesus tells him, your sins are forgiven. I have to wonder if the guy complained the whole way there. Won't do any good. You can't get in, and get there and see the crowd. See, I knew we can't get in. I call him Eeyore, ain't going to work, won't happen. But this is bringing someone to Jesus for healing or forgiving when they don't believe it, regardless of their faith. The one that really hit me, that started me down this rabbit trail of searching this, is in Luke 11, verse 5 and following. And you know that story well. This is where the man goes to his neighbor at midnight, and says, would you get up and give me bread? I have a friend who came and I need bread for him. And he keeps after him. The guy finally, I can't get up. I'm in bed with my kid. He finally gets up and gives him the bread. But that type of intercessory prayer, this is saying, my friend, Lord, my friend needs help. Would you equip me to help them? That just really opened my eyes to what intercessory prayer really was. And there are a bunch of other examples. I thought that would make a really good study in and of itself, is on intercessory prayer. But one thing that I'll add on this, back on this chapter 18, if you look at verse 23, it said, and Abraham came near and said. He's standing there face to face with God, with the Lord, and he pleads with him. There is no veil between them. He's speaking, God calls him my friend. He's speaking to his friend.
And he's not dying.
And he's not dying, but he's standing there face. But what I'm getting at is there's no veil between them. There's no veil today either.
My Bible says Abraham approached
Yeah,
him.
mine too.
Yeah, yeah.
And I thought that's very bold of him
Mm-hmm.
to approach God.
Yeah. I'll have to look up that word and see the sense of that, because what I was reading on it, but becoming near, as I remember, the word indicated a hesitancy. It's just a very humility, very humbly coming to it. So approach is an interesting word. What translation is that? Is that NIV? I read through the NIV and I pulled it out for some things, but I didn't look at it for the whole thing.
Amplified says
Yep.
approach too.
Okay. All right. So the veil's been torn down. So now the question is, what's keeping you from praying? So that's the question you can take with you tonight. Any other thoughts or questions? We got a few extra minutes.
I'm going to have an Ask Betty session next week.
I'll try to get through 19 quickly so we can do that. You've been saving them up. Gina, you've been saving up your questions?
I remember writing one somewhere.
I have something.
Yeah.
You said back in verse 17,
Uh-huh.
and you said, the Lord said, shall I hide this from Abraham? And you said, he's talking to himself. So I didn't interpret it that way.
So you
I
think
interpreted it that he was talking to the two other men.
that's a good thought. I hadn't thought about it that way. But still, I don't think Abraham is hearing what he's
No, I
saying.
don't think Abraham.
Okay.
I thought he was talking to the two other men there.
Yeah.
Jay, do you think I should?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Okay.
yeah. Now, that's a good
Like
thought.
asking their opinion.
Yeah.
What do you think
Yeah. I don't know that God would ask the angels, do you think what I should do? But
But
Talking to them.
yeah.
yes.
Yeah, the commentaries really didn't mention that. They just mentioned the two thoughts of whether he was musing out loud and Abraham was overhearing him, or versus speaking to himself and Abraham didn't hear it. And between those two, I don't think Abraham could hear it, but that's possible that there was counsel.
It was a rhetorical question.
Yeah, because he knew what he was going to do. So yeah, exactly. Anything else? All right. One thing that I was looking ahead at the chapters upcoming for next year, and if a chapter has got two separate accounts or two separate incidences that take place, I think I'm going to try to break them in two so we can have more time on each of them instead of trying to rush them both together. Because when I sort of, as I'm working on this, I sort of gauge how long it's going to take by how many pages I have. I know how many pages I need if I'm going to do an hour, how many pages I'm going to need if I do an hour and a half. So I was getting close to how many pages was going to run us close. So that's why I kind of cut that off there. But I did add in my notes those things about intercessory prayer just so I would have a copy of it. So anything else?
I think that's true about intercessory prayer because sometimes God answers your prayer through me.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, like you said, you know, He uses me to answer my prayer.
Yeah. Yeah. There are all kinds of different types of intercessory prayer that calls for different actions and different responses. I mean, there's the one in Luke 18 about the unjust judge. You know, the widow woman, you know, keeps nagging him. He says, I don't regard man nor God, but I'll answer her prayer because she's nagging me to death. So, and the gist of the parable is that's how unjust people will react. That's not how a righteous God will react. So
they didn't have the Holy Spirit. I mean, I think the Holy Spirit guides us.
Oh yeah.
When we should pray for someone and how we should pray for them.
Yeah. Yeah, but these different scenarios, these different scriptures give us direction on in what situation, how we should pray in that, what depending on what the need is.
But I think the Holy Spirit does too.
Well, yeah, but, you know, you wouldn't need the Bible if that's all you know. So, anyway, so, anything else?
More rabbit trails.
More rabbit trails.
Yeah.
Well, let's pray. Father, we thank you for this scripture. And we thank you for the boldness of Abraham, but yet we